Last time, we built a snowman. Today, we're going to build a snowman's natural habitat, a castle tower. And for reasons that will be easier to understand towards the end of the video, instead of starting with a tube, I'm pressing the F4 key so I can see the edges, we're actually going to start with a solid cylinder that'll be pretty detailed, and then we'll cut the hollow part out of the cylinder at the end. So go ahead and create your standard cylinder object. You can click and drag, release once, and now you choose the height and then click again. Already it's not centered and my OCD is kicking in, so I'm going to switch to the Move tool and right click on those arrows to center it. Now I can go back to Modify and actually go back to defining how big I want that cylinder to be. About 4 inches or 100 millimeters across is fine. And then I want it to be 120 millimeters or a little shy of 5 inches tall. I want the sides to be pretty smooth, so I'm going to max that out. And as for height segments, I actually want those this time. I want 3. We'll learn more about that later. For now, we need to start making an entrance. I'm going to switch to that Rotate tool and copy this cylinder since it's already centered. Now when you rotate it, you'll notice that those numbers are pretty not even. It doesn't make nice, smooth 90-degree angles easily. And while I could easily just type in 90 here, there is another way. The Angle Snap tool. With that, when you rotate it, it snaps to 5-degree increments. Now, of course, that entrance is too big, so we need to slim that down to something like that. Now it's too tall. And then with the Move tool, and if you lose track of it, you can always click on the name here. We need it to come out this way and up that way, or move them both axes at the same time. So we want to eliminate the bottom of this so that we can drag the sides down and have them be straight up and down. And we don't need these height segments, so we can get rid of those. And 200's a bit smooth for such a small feature, so we can drop that down to 100. We're going to use this Slice tool. You can see it's already made a line here. And that's how we can get just 180 degrees. Of course, it may end up looking like that, or that, or that, depending on if you did the slice from or the slice to, or if you rotated the cylinder that way instead of this way. But just know that you can rotate it back to be wherever you need. Now to pull those sides down, we're going to switch back to the Move tool, and in this Modify screen, we are going to add an Edit Poly modifier. To cover your middle school geometry real quick, objects have a vertex, which is each one of these points. They also have edges, which are these white lines, and they have polygons, or faces. I'm going to select one on bottom, hold Control, and select another, and it's telling me that that gizmo in the center of everything I've selected, is that far in the air. If I right-click here, it'll drop it to the ground to be even with the bottom of that, the main part of the castle. And also at the bottom here, if I switch back to vertex mode, I can see that that sticks in just enough, and that sticks in just enough to where when I unite these objects, there's not going to be any gaps. Now that entrance probably looks a little tall, so I'm going to press my F3 key, so I can click and drag and see everything I'm selecting. The important thing is that I'm not selecting down here and grabbing that vertex, but just the ones on top. And if you have all your views like this would actually be a really convenient time to be able to look at the front of your castle and select just there, or from the front view, you can see it's those guys there. So a perspective is good just because that's kind of the views we're used to in real life. But if you ever need to get real technical and say only select the top half of that because you want it to have a couple layers like that, you can. But for just about everything I'm going to teach in these classes, you can do it all in the perspective view. And we're going to drop that down something like that. Press that F3 key again, and if you don't have those lines showing, you can hit F4 to get those back. And then to get out of editing this one object, you're going to have to right-click and choose Top Level, and now you can click off of it. Now back to this guy. You can see we have these 3 segments I left in there, height-wise. We're going to add an Edit Poly and select Vertices. I'm going to switch over to this side view here and maximize it. I want these vertices to be 100 millimeters up, and I want those vertices to be 80 millimeters up. Now I'm going to select polygons and select through all of those right there, so I'm not selecting the top or the ones beneath it. And then I'm going to switch out of this view, just middle mouse button into here to select that view and maximize it. And now using the scale tool, instead of scaling up and down or in all directions, I'm going to scale just in the X and Y. About that much works for me. Now what we need to do is cut some out of the top. We're going to cut some out of here. We're going to put brick lines in it and make this entrance hollow. To make this entrance hollow, we are going to copy this object we made with the clone tool. That's now our cylinder 3 we're working on here. We can go back to the cylinder here and shrink that radius down a couple millimeters. And we need it to be a little bit longer. Having it longer just makes it easier to switch between the two that we're grabbing. Now, whenever I have objects that I'm going to be cutting out of each other, I always color code, because all this light blue can be quite hard to tell apart. So when I have my object selected, I click here, and I can choose a color. I typically use red for objects I'm going to subtract, and green or blue for objects that I'm going to keep together. Now, you're probably not going to have any colors down here. You just select one of these slots, choose Add Custom Colors, create the color you want, add color, X out of here, and click OK. What's going to happen at the end is I'm going to tell it to get rid of this red, but keep the blue that's not part of that red, so that'll make it nice and hollow. I'm also going to copy that cylinder, go back to the cylinder, shrink that down by 5 millimeters of radius. And now you can choose to keep that edit poly or not. You can kind of see this blue outline here. If I get rid of this edit poly by clicking on it and choosing that trash can, our cylinder will just be straight here so that we have a smooth up and down interior. And that's what I'm going to keep for this one. Now I'm going to move this cylinder to -1 so I can select it on the bottom and make it a couple millimeters taller. I don't need any height segments. And I'm going to, of course, turn it red. Now the next thing I need to do is make sure that this goes all the way back into where that red is. So I'm going to hit that F3 key. And I can see that there's a little bit of a gap here where this red doesn't come back into this red. So that means when I start cutting around that there's going to be like a wall here where the entrance doesn't go in. The other way to see that, if you can't really see through that wireframe, is to select this green object here, and you can click on that eye there, or you can right-click in the background and choose Hide Selection. We can see that those reds don't line up. So I'm going to select this guy here, and because it really doesn't need to be precise in this direction at all, just hit my scale tool, scale them up, move them back. And if I want everything to be visible again, I can click the eyes or right-click Unhide All. To start adding some decoration, I'm going to take this guy here, make a copy. I'm going to take that copy, move it up to here, about so. Go back to cylinder and shrink that radius down even more. Something about like that works. What I'm trying to do is this row of edges here, I'm trying to get up close to that without going through it. And then with that Edit Poly, I'm going to grab these vertices, switch to that transparent view, grab the ones here on the back, and move those up here. What I'm trying to do is get it close to this wall without going through, which if I unmaximize the view, a view like this left would come in pretty handy. Of course, something else I could do is remember that the radius on this is 50 millimeters, and I could, go in here and have that be 50.1 or 50.001 millimeters off. Next thing I need to do is grab these vertices on bottom and raise them up to be level with that. Now I can go to top level and go back to my perspective view. Going to select more vertices, just bring those in to make things a little nicer to look at. It can stick out more, but that's fine. So what I'm going to do now is subtract this all the way around here. There's a couple ways to do that. The way that we would normally do that right now is make a copy over here, have to rotate it, and make another copy, rotate, go around. But you can see that lining all those up is not going to be easy at all. Fortunately, there is a shortcut. Select the Move tool and make another clone, except this time we're going to do an instance. I can then rotate this clone 180 degrees. And all I have to do is move it on this y-axis. And I'm going to select this original one, copy that number with Control-C, and paste it over here with Control-V. Now they are perfectly the opposite side of the center apart from each other. That matters because when I select both and switch to this rotate tool, I'm going to hold Shift as I rotate them along this axis here. Alright, so that is 20 degrees that I rotated them, and I want to rotate them around 180 degrees, which means I need to make 8 copies. Of course, the other way to do it is just pick a really big number and delete all the extras, but we're going to apply some math here. And just like that, we can subtract all these red things out to give us some nice accents. Now to give it some brick texture, we're going to go back to Create and create a tube. We're going to go ahead and center that tube and raise him 10 millimeters off the ground. We only want it to be 0.8 of a millimeter thick. We don't need any height segments. We want it to be pretty smooth. And that's going to be here at the bottom, this tube 1. I'm going to click back to here, because let's say I don't remember on that cylinder how far across it is, 50 millimeters. Now I can go back to that tube, type in 49.5 and 51. And what that will do is have it cut inside just a little bit once we subtract this out. And you know, I don't need the bricks to cut that deep, so we could do 49.8. That'll make it easier for 3D printing. I'm going to create an instance, change the height to 20, make another instance, raise the height to 30, because if I hold Shift and drag up here, it's not going to be a precise number. But what I could do is get it close or slightly over, create a bunch of copies, switch to this view. I don't need that one, or this one, or that one, or that one, or that one. So that'll give us the horizontal lines for the bricks. We still need the vertical lines. To do that, I'm going to create a simple box here. Remember, we had them cutting 2 millimeters in. I'm going to add an edit mesh. Edit poly would also work just fine. I'm going to select that face, which I want to be at 49.8. And instead of adjusting the height of this box, I can just adjust that top face there. Go to the top level and center it. I'm going to copy this guy as an instance, rotate him 180 degrees, and move him to the exact opposite of the X here. So just stick a negative sign in front of it if it's positive. Middle mouse button here, hold Control, select that guy, switch to the rotate tool, hold Shift. That looks pretty good. 20 degrees again. So I need 9 copies, or 8 plus that original to go around. Now, fortunately, because the only boxes we've created are just this one layer, I can select all of them and create a group. I can switch to move. Now when I select any box, they all move together. I'm gonna copy, or clone, instance, and add 5 here. Whoops, need to add 10. And what I can do now is rotate. Let's say I want to rotate 10 degrees. Or if you want the bricks to spiral, we can keep rotating 5 or 15 degrees as we go up. So create another instance. Move it up another 10. Rotate. Clone. Instance. Add another 10. Rotate. And if you want to get even faster, now that we've done one time around, we can group those 4 groups, clone it, move it up another 40, and I believe that finishes off the bricks. Now I'm not going to bother doing anything up here. In fact, I think, yeah, I know what I'm going to do up there. That'll be later that we mess with that. Okay, so now for here, I don't want that guy cutting through this. So I'm going to click here, group, ungroup, group, ungroup, get rid of that guy. All right, let's start getting into that adding and subtracting I was talking about. I'm going to press Ctrl A to select everything. With the Move tool, hold Shift and drag it on that X-axis. And I just need a copy. The one time 3ds Max will get pretty unstable is when you're doing lots and lots of adding and subtracting. So I always make a copy in case something goes wrong here. I have that to go back to. And of course, save. Start with our main body object here that we'll be subtracting from. Go back to Create, Compound Objects, Pro Boolean. A regular Boolean would work, but what a Pro Boolean does is it cleans up your mesh as you go, which is really handy. We are going to start subtracting, start picking. We can start subtracting all those guys up here. We can subtract that group there, that ring, that group there, that ring, that group, that ring. It would appear that that was not as far up as I would have liked. You can see that it's not cutting all the way up there and it seems to be coming down too far. So right then and there, we can right-click to stop, select all of that, and just delete it. Because I need to come back here and raise this up. As long as those guys are intersecting a little bit, should be fine. Alright, so now we can select it all, and start again. Something else you can do at this point is select all that original and hide selection just so nothing can happen to it. Start with our main body, compound, pro boolean, start picking. Actually, something else we can do is the more groups we make, the quicker this process goes. So we can select one of these guys. These are the red cylinders with 104 faces. Just select all those, except we don't want that one. That one is number 25. So I'll select these guys, form a group. And I still have some boxes here from when I ungrouped, and I'm going to group those guys together. All right. So this main green cylinder, pro boolean. So now when I subtract that, oh, I guess I had that middle one selected as well. Subtract that group, that ring, that ring, that group, that ring. And as you do more and more adding and subtracting, it will get slower. All right, now that we're down to here, we're going to switch to union because we're adding that blue. And then back to subtraction for that red. As we can see, we've got some cleanup that needs to happen here. That's not going to be any fun. Of course, a way to get around that is to Control Z, right click to get off of that. Select this guy here, go back to modify on that edit poly, and bring those two faces further down. Now it'll make a nice clean cut. So select this guy, start picking, subtraction, that red. There we go, all fixed. Now we need to right click, convert to editable poly. To make sure that there's no errors, which will occasionally creep in, on this modifier list, scroll all the way down to the bottom or start typing STL. This will check to make sure that there's no open edges, double faces, spikes, any of that nasty stuff. For 3D animation, where you're just creating pretty pictures or movies, this generally does not matter. You can have objects sticking through each other, and nothing's wrong with that. But when you get to 3D printing, there are things wrong with that. Your 3D printing software will have a hard time figuring out what's supposed to exist and what's not. So we have to do an STL check for 3D printing. Click on check there, and that may take a while depending on your computer. And we have no errors. Let's say there was an error. Let's say that my view's messed up. Let's say for whatever reason there was no bottom here. If I go back and choose STL check, (426) errors. That sounds like a lot. But if you right click, convert to editable poly, and click polygons, it will highlight in red all of the polygons that have a problem. Notice they're all along the bottom here. That's where the problem is. Now we talked about what a vertex, an edge, and a polygon were. In Edit Poly mode, you can select borders. Edit Mesh does not do this. You can select that border here, and what a border does is it selects all the edges that don't have a closed polygon closing them in. Because if I try and select a border up here, there aren't any. If I have border selected and press Control A, it will still only select down here, because that's all the borders is just down here. Now, fortunately, I can just come down here and press Cap, and it automatically closes all of that up. Sometimes that will not be the case, and what you'll have to do is in Edge mode here, select two edges across from each other, and click Bridge. As you might imagine, that would be a very tedious process to go through and do all that. And also, you don't want to put two bridges right beside each other, because if I do that here, that edge is two edges in the same place that are not actually sealed together. So if you create them every other spot, go up to that border tool, and cap it, that's the way to seal them together. Hopefully you don't have to do a bunch of mesh cleanup, because it is a nightmare, and 3ds Max will do that from time to time, but as long as your objects are simple like this, you shouldn't encounter it too much in the wild. But if you do have some errors, and it just keeps on coming back every time you redo all that adding and subtracting, that is how you would do some mesh fixing. Now the last thing I want to do here is cut some chunks out of the top. And to do that, we're going to center this guy back in the center. And we're just going to create a basic box that's pretty long and tall. Center it. And move him 110 millimeters up. Now I'm going to add a width segment here. Actually, I'm going to put in two of them. Go to Edit Mesh. Select that face and that face. Actually, no, I have to do it by vertex. Select all the ones in the middle. And I'm going to scale them closer together so that we get a little bit of a tapering effect there. That's too much. Something like that. Right-click to go to top level. Rotate 40 degrees, which means we need 5 copies. Ah, that didn't make something I like. Let's rotate 45 degrees and make 3 copies. And because I did it as an instance, I can go back to the box here, make it wider, and they all get wider. I can select those 4 boxes, bring them down a little bit more, select this guy, go back to create compound row boolean, and start subtracting. And that gives us a castle for the snowman to live in. One of the nice things about this design is that 3D printing doesn't like overhangs, basically stuff floating out in the middle that's not supported. This archway isn't going to come out the best without support material, but it should come out okay. and pretty much everything on here should print without supports largely okay. More on that in another video. Right now, I've got just one more episode planned, which will be actually creating something in the real world that's useful and relies on real world measurements. So make sure to be subscribed and check out that video when it comes out. There may be more videos as I do more and more concepts in my own 3D modeling, but it's just a third one planned. For more 3D printing content, like souping up a lawnmower and protecting my house from critters, you can check out these videos over here. Until then, see you in the next one.